Now, protests are nothing new. There have been plenty, with campaigners marching for everything from climate change to gun control to Brexit. But what's new is that children are now organising and leading their own protests. How young is too young to be a political activist? A campaign to reduce climate change, organised by a schoolgirl from Sweden, has gone global. Children from across the UK have joined those in Australia, Belgium, Switzerland and Germany in the Youth Strike for Climate campaign. But do they understand the nuances of what they're campaigning for?
Children are taking to the streets, whether it's to push for gun control, more urgency with climate change, or just supporting their parents in Brexit protests. This month, school children in multiple countries walked out of class to protest climate change inaction. In 2018, a gunman opened fire in a school in Parkland, Florida, killing 17 students and staff members. Survivors organised the March for Our Lives rally, attended by hundreds of thousands across America, to call for tighter gun control. But do children really know what they're fighting for? US academic Dr. Gail Saltz argues children need to have the developmental capacity to understand nuance and grey zone. Are children ready to be activists, or are we underestimating their ability to influence change?
So let's meet today's guests. Joining us on Skype is Dr. Terina Matos, Senior Lecturer in Sociology and Media at City University of London. Here at the round table is Terina Hine, a political campaigner who works for Stop the War Coalition, and Amy Longland, Chief Operating Officer at My Life, My Say. Ladies, welcome to Roundtable. Amy, let me start with you. My Life, My Say, that's a group that empowers young children. Tell us what that's about and empowers them to do what?
So we're a youth democratic engagement charity predominantly, and what we try and do is we empower young people and provide them with the tools to affect change within society. So we predominantly work with kind of 16 to 25-year-olds, but we do support things like the climate change strike, because ultimately we believe that young people are not apathetic, but they often don't have the tools or avenues to address these issues. For example, the young people that took part in the climate change strike, they were too young to vote, most of them. And those that are of age to vote often don't view voting or classical forms of politics as a way to actually address the issues that affect them. So, you know, absolutely, I think it's great that there are more and more young people mobilising and actually standing up for what they believe in.
Well, being politically aware is one thing.
Yeah.
Should they be activists?
Well, yeah, you know, I think being politically aware is a very broad topic. You know, you can, with the availability of information nowadays, with social media, it is easier for young people to use those tools to kind of mobilise and have these movements. But I think it's really, really important that they're given that space to be activists and to actually affect change and take ownership of certain issues. You know, obviously there is a limit. How young is too young? Young children, actual children, should be able to enjoy their childhood and not worry too much. But I think, you know, it's amazing that this many young people and children have actually mobilised on topics such as climate change, on the March for Their Lives, and they're actually standing up and saying, we do care about our communities, we care about our world, and, you know, we want to be listened to. And I think that's so important. I
know you've got 3 children of your own. Yep. Did they join you on marches? What did they make of it all?
Well, they have for many, many years. They were very young, much too young to make a decision when they first came on a march with me, which was over the Iraq War when they were, you know, tiny babies. But yeah, they've been on environment marches, and they think that they haven't had the right to vote. They are not able to vote, and they would like to have their voices heard.
So this argument about children sometimes don't understand the grey areas, the nuances, the knock-on effects of what they're asking for. What do you say to that?
Well, obviously it depends on how you define children and what age we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, when you're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-olds, of course. When you're talking about 14, 15, 16-year-olds, I think absolutely not. I think many of the older children would perhaps be more equipped to deal with the nuances than many adults who are eligible to vote and allowed to participate in politics.
Carolina, what do you think? Should children be activists? And a large part of this depends on what we're defining as children, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I agree with what has been said, and this is something that I also put forward. And with my experience over 20 years teaching young, just previously finishing their teenager years and starting adulthood, so 18 to 20-year-olds, and also having a young son myself, I know that there's a slight difference between what we could see as children and the young age. For instance, my son, what I think is also something that we must see as a political act, which is actually teaching our children the values of tolerance, of respecting difference, kindness and generosity, and having them have their childhood years and as much as possible. Whereas when you look at a child who is 12 or 13, that's very different. So you are this is the right stage, for instance, where the children, where you can actually, they cease to be children, they start to be teenagers, and they can start seeing the shades of grey. They can start to understand more even the values that were taught. Why did my mother teach me about being tolerant and respecting people? They can not simply shout, oh, I hate Trump, you know, in a march at 5 and not understand what they're talking about. They're actually now they're more equipped. And so when they come to university, for instance, and what I have seen teaching young girls, I would classify them as actually, many of them in the first year are actually teenagers, to be honest, is that they are more politically aware, using the expression that someone else said that, than we would think. We actually tend to undermine their capacity and their knowledge. And
so this is one thing we were talking about, that children actually understand more than we give them credit for, and yet
that's right.
A lot of 16-year-olds, for example, cannot vote in the UK. Is there an argument that they should be allowed to vote in the UK?
Oh yes, I agree totally.
Yeah.
I think I voted when I was 16, and what we see, for instance, what I wanted to just compliment quickly on my talk is that if we look at things such as from Brexit, as well as the support that they gave many of the young students for lecturers in the strike, to things that have already been mentioned, we see that young people are involved politically, but not necessarily, just to conclude and to make a link with what everyone has said, as activists.
Very difficult for, or more difficult for younger people to speak out, I guess, because society doesn't really encourage them to do that.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of young people, you know, from the work that we do, so obviously we do a lot of outreach all across the country, and we talk to young people, and a lot of that is around voter engagement, voter registration, and also we do a lot of research into what young people think and feel about political processes, decision-making processes, and a lot of the time Westminster and these kind of classical forms of activism or getting involved in politics feel incredibly distant from young people, and they don't feel as though, you know, that these are avenues that they can address, and then they also aren't able to vote. So
to be fair, Westminster feels incredibly distant from a lot of people who can vote.
But there is a sense, I think, of feeling as though their opinion doesn't matter, even if they, you know, even if they do try and mobilise, try and take ownership of an issue, they're not considered a valuable. You know, we always talk about it within My Life Must Say that there's this kind of vicious circle where young people, you know, aren't considered a really valuable voting bloc. Their issues aren't addressed in party manifestos. Because their issues aren't addressed in party manifestos, why would they bother voting? And because they don't vote,
so it's a vicious circle.
So it's a circle. And what it's about is saying, okay, young people are politically active, they do care about their communities, but they just use different avenues. They use social media, they mobilise, they actually have other ways of doing so. And I think that the fact that there are these young people now taking action in the way that they are, it demonstrates wholeheartedly that, you know, maybe they can't vote, but there are loads of other ways that they can be active.
I mean, the Swedish campaign, Greta Thunberg, who has had this climate change campaign, has had a lot of media coverage. I would say that quite a lot of young people's campaigns don't get as much media coverage. It's interesting the kind of comments that she's got. Some of the older people saying, oh, well, this isn't a great campaign because you're encouraging people to skip school.
There was quite a lot of negative publicity following the climate strike from the students, and you know, our own government said that it was a waste of time and they were wasting teachers' time, as though it's not. Political engagement is an education in itself. I mean, what those kids would have learned on that day, on that Friday, would have been amazing.
And how empowering that is. And didn't quite a few teachers join the strike in the end? They joined the protest. Teachers joined it, so that whole idea is.
And I'm sure many of them would have taught around. In the days running up to it about the topics.
And I actually think, sorry, I just think
could I make a point, please, that I want to talk about what you mentioned?
But there's something really valuable, I think, just quickly, sorry, Carolina, there's something really valuable, I think, and something even more powerful about the fact that they are so young. So the fact that this, you know, Greta, she was only 15 years old and she took a stand. I think a lot of the reason why there's a lot of media around it is because they are so young, and people are thinking, oh my gosh, even at 13, 14, 15, there are young people who care this much about it. So actually, that's part of the strength of this movement, I think, is that they are that little bit younger, and people are suddenly waking up and realising that they care about these issues.
And do you think, Carolina, that adds more weight to an issue like climate change, which of course is a very important issue, but it's become a global movement because children are saying, do you know what, this is our world and we're going to be, this is our future.
Yeah, the point that I wanted to make, as researchers in media sociology, one of the things that we have been researching is the ways in which young people are actually taking on to social media and other forms of political activism, if you wish, which have a lot to do with the fact that, yes, they feel that they don't have a voice represented in Westminster, but it's not only young adults who feel that, women feel that as well. So a lot of research looks into NGOs, feminist movements, and the ways in which they use those avenues also to engage politically. So in terms of Westminster, is still seen as not giving a voice to many sectors of society, which is not just children. What is interesting as well to highlight is that there's a contradiction between, with our students, what we see is that many of them, they're doing sociology, they are politically interested, as I've said, and everyone has said as well, but they struggle with traditional classic politics, with a lot of, similarly to statistics, but basically to understand the whole political structure. And sometimes they do feel alienated to it. So it's kind of a paradox where they are engaging politically, and they actually gave a lot of support for universities in the time of the strike as well. And people kind of downplayed that they didn't vote in Brexit. Many of our students did go to vote regarding leave or remain. So they are engaged. But on the other hand, they also have difficulty with traditional politics and traditional governance.
I think this whole argument, they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't, so to speak, because, you know, young people are often accused of being really apathetic. But then when young people actually did mobilise and take part in this climate change, you know, people moaned that they didn't go to school, they're wasting time.
And some of the issues that are being highlighted are, as Carolina's saying, not just traditional political issues. We've seen some very young people taking to social media, taking to Twitter. We saw Bana Alabed, 7 years old, tweeting about the war in Syria. And there are other instances of children as young as that, sort of highlighting a political campaign. So are we going to see more of that on social media, given that this is a tool that many young people use?
I'm sure we will. And I think that what we have to recognise is that you don't suddenly become an adult. It's a process that you go through. So when you're very young, you will become engaged, hopefully, in all sorts of issues. And yes, the nuances, maybe you don't understand, but as you get older, you will understand more and more and more. And so hopefully when you are an adult, you're able to fully engage in society. And not having gone through that process means that you'll suddenly become 18 and be expected to vote and be expected to be able to understand everything. I mean, that's just a crazy thing to expect of anybody.
Are there issues that we should shield them from, that they shouldn't, you know, the more shocking things that go on in the world, like female genital mutilation or child rape, or things that maybe we want to shield our children from? Or is everything fair game for children to become aware of and have a position on?
I mean, I think it's a really hard question to answer, really, because who decides that?
Yes.
And you know, if something like FGM has directly affected a young girl who then wants to take ownership of that trauma and use it for good, then who are we to say that she can't be involved?
Right.
Do you see what I mean? But in some ways, I do think, you know, if you are very young, you should be able to have your childhood and not have to worry too much about everything. And if it is really something like child rape, for example, maybe that is something where you draw a line. But again, who decides?
And we need to have some sort of conversation with very young children about some of these issues anyway, because they need to be able to protect themselves. I mean, you know, that children who will become victims of these things need to understand that it is something and that it's
and maybe
wrong.
once they start asking questions about these things, then it's on us, the adults, to answer.
And obviously how you engage with a very young child about something as sensitive as FGM or rape or anything it will depend very much on their age and their ability.
Does it also
to take
depend
on?
I'm interested, for example, you were saying that your children, you took them on marches from when they were very young and too young to understand. Did you allow them to make their own judgment and opinions on the war in Iraq, for example, or did you only give them your point of view? I mean, how informed were they?
Well, then they were babies, so they were completely
obviously,
uninformed.
I mean, as they became.
But as they've got older, they're of course they're entitled to their own opinion, and they engage with all sorts of people at school. Their friendship groups, the parents of their friends and so on, and their teachers, who I'm sure will give them different opinions, and within my family who will have different opinions to mine. So yes, of course, like any parent, I will tell them what I think, but they're aware that it is one perspective and one viewpoint, and they are entitled to make their own. I mean, that's...
Carolina, do young people... are they able to access a wealth of information and make informed opinions about things, or do they get quickly pushed down one avenue or another?
I think that's a very important question, because it relates to the whole teaching and what we do, for instance, as lecturers. It's not, and having a small child and also having taught for years the young people, one of the things, you do not impose your way of thinking. You know, they need to have access to various forms of information, theoretical debates. They need to, and this, they themselves will decide their opinion, right? Obviously, we hope that our child or our student will follow in the views that we have. But I, as someone who's highly in tune with the democratic process and have had all sorts of students from across the political spectrum, etc., what we know that is important for someone's development is that they need to have access to different perspectives. You can't just have access to one side of the debate. And just tapping into what others have said about and going back to my child, I think there is a moment in time where we have to preserve them from the more uglier aspects of the world regarding female genital mutilation, rape, etc., because they don't understand. So in terms of the values of tolerance and respect and living in society and respecting your peers, this is something important which they will understand that more.
So it's about values, it's about having right values rather than...
Exactly.
I mean,
that's important, because just coming back to this, what has happened today is that politics has become increasingly polarized and to the extreme. It's like some people are saying, this is my opinion, that's your opinion. And there's like no middle ground. The democratic consensus is kind of disappearing a bit. So this is a problem that we're having today.
But isn't that the point of activism, that you take a position, you take a position?
Yeah, I do think social media at the moment is a really powerful tool for young people. And, you know, we always say that there's no point, you know, creating a space or trying to use Parliament saying young people come to us. You know, we have to go where young people go in their digital and social lives. And that is social media. And it's a very powerful tool that young people can use, not just to mobilise, but to inform themselves. But at the same time, and also to debate with one another on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, or Instagram even. But we do have to be careful because, you know, social media is somewhere where you can either end up in an echo chamber, so where you end up just hearing the same viewpoints over and over again, or where you're exposed to fake news, fake bits of information, or you get involved in some kind of movement online where it might be a far right movement. Than what if a young kid, a 9 or 10-year-old, gets involved in? So you have to be careful.
But I think that's the role. That is the role of society, of education, of parents. To help guide a child, to help them develop their critical faculties, whether it's at school or at home, and to for them to become engaged in a political process is one of the ways that they will develop those critical faculties.
In fact, a study 2 years ago found that 58% of 10 to 20-year-olds in the UK took part in some kind of social action. Does that surprise you? Should it be higher?
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean,
not really, no.
I think that young people are totally underestimated. And from my experience, I was really involved around the EU referendum on getting young people registered to vote and informed about voting. And I just think that
16-year-olds couldn't vote.
They couldn't vote, but they could mobilise and they could get involved. But my point is that even the timing of the referendum was right in the middle of exams, even all the information around how to vote, everything like that, it would have been the same, I think, if it was 16-year-olds. But there just is a complete and utter lack of emphasis placed on young people. And is that on purpose or not? I don't know. Young people could be such a powerful voting.
And in the Scottish referendum, 16-years were able to vote.
And that completely
that's right, it did. Many people.
And it did influence the outcome. So is there a downside to children becoming activists in that if they are going all out and campaigning for something they believe in powerfully, and then nothing changes, does that actually give them a sense of, well, what was the point?
Yeah, I mean, we always say that, Brexit is a good example of how, something that happened in politics really politicised the generation. And I think it politicised my generation. We saw loads and loads of young people mobilising and getting involved in politics. And what the government, I think, and what political processes have failed to do is really garner that mobilisation. And having done this outreach across the country, young people mobilised at the time, they got involved, they voted, and then all of a sudden, nothing really changed, and they feel even more disillusioned now because they did take action and nothing changed. So I think it's about garnering that mobilisation and really trying to channel it somewhere, because young people can be such a force. And I do think that if they, you've got to be so careful about young people, if they do become mobilised, that there will be a sense of disillusionment, and I've seen that firsthand across, especially
a lot of campaigns are an uphill battle.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Climate change.
I have seen that firsthand, and especially in rural areas where young people just don't feel as though they've been listened to. The further away they are from Westminster, the more they feel completely overlooked in the process. And it is about giving them the credit that they're due. And I think coming back to the climate change protests, I think it's incredible. And it's about
does it
keeping
surprise
that
you that this became a global movement, that this caught on in so many different countries? And why do you think that is?
Well, it did surprise me on one level, because I think, like many adults, we weren't completely aware that this issue was something that was going to galvanise quite so many people all across the world, and it was amazing. I thought it was a fantastic thing. I looking back retrospectively, now I think, of course. I mean, this is people's future. These young people are motivated because they can see directly how it will affect them and their lives.
And it obviously went global because of things like social media.
Yes.
Do you ladies think we're going to see more of these kinds? Are we going to see more children sparking more sort of global?
Yeah.
Well, basically, what we are seeing is that students and young people increasingly, if we look at Obama, for instance, the Obama campaign, that was a moment when young people took to social media in a way that was never seen before. So we talk today about the EU and Brexit, etc. But that is nothing compared to the fact that what we have is that a lot of debate on how young people are much more in tune with politics today than they were before. Because what we had in political science and communications was a view that that the young people were simply too disengaged in politics. And this is one of the benefits of social media, is that actually, well, they're much more engaged than we think. What they are disengaged with is with the traditional structures of politics. Right. And having said that, there's also the negativity of social media is the fact that, as she was saying, what you have is excessive polarization. So my point there was in terms of what we as a society have to do is to continue to use that space as a form of democratic debate, not just echo chambers, and not just what even is happening sometimes in particular groups. I want to talk just with my group. I want to talk just with people that I agree with.
And we have to say that there have been some really impressive child campaigners. I mean, Malala Yousafzai, who has, you know, just changed so many opinions. So this is obviously a way that we're going to hopefully change some of the things about the future of our countries.
I'd like to think so, yeah. I just think don't underestimate, you know, when young people really care about something and they can mobilise, you know, don't underestimate what they can achieve. You know, we always say that young people really do care. They care about politics, they care about their future. And so
maybe we, you know, 16-year-olds should be able to vote, and we should totally campaign for that.
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent, ladies. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on this subject. Really interesting, and what some of these children are doing is quite impressive, isn't it? And thank you for watching. If you want to share your comments with us, we are on Twitter @TRT World, #Roundtable. Until next time, bye bye for now.